And all this will be reflected many years later in his fairy tales. Charles, would you like to give a writing lesson to the Grimm brothers, please? I think they need one. In the first floor, there is all his own rooms, his bedroom, Sleeping Beauty is probably his masterpiece. Today you are invited to turn with me a few pages in the life of the king of fairy tales, Charles Perrault. He wrote at the very end of his life, in his 70s, 8 fairy tales. Les contes de ma mère Loi, ou Histoire du temps passé, Stories of Past Times, which have been told to children in France since 1697. They are Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, Little Red Riding Hood, Cendrillon, ou La Pantoufle de Verre, Cinderella or the Glass Slipper, La Belle au Bois dormant, Sleeping Beauty, Le Maître Chat ou le Chat Botté, Puss in Boots, Les Fées, The Fairies, Riquet à la houppe, Ricky of the Tuft, Barbe Bleue, Bluebeard, and Le Petit Pousset, Little Tom Tom, which followed 3 versified fairy tales, Donkey Skin, Griselidis, and Les Souhaits Ridicules, The Ridiculous Wishes. Collaborator of Colbert, the minister of Louis XIV, working in the Department of Building, super manager of the building and the construction and the decoration of Versailles and Le Louvre, diligent workaholic, and one of the 40 members of l'Académie Française, the French Academy, he wrote poetry his entire life. But little did he know that the writings which will be remembered and celebrated among all his works would be his fairy tales, that he published under the name of his son and that he doesn't even mention in his memoirs. Now, there is a lot of his life in his fairy tales. He has a lot in common with his characters in his fairy tales, with his heroes. Like Little Tom Tom, he is the last of a family. All his brothers are older than him, and he's going to help and support them all his life long, even will share a home as an adult when he is in his 40s. Like Cinderella, he's called everywhere all the time to do everything, so he doesn't have a minute to himself. Like Puss in Boots, he has to show all the creativity, all the inventions, all the ideas he has to serve his master Colbert and the king and to make the impossible happen. Like Puss in Boots also, he believes in the power of words. And like all the fairy tales heroes, he has to deal with a good amount of villains and ferocious enemies throughout his life. Mémoire de ma vie, livre premier. Je suis né le 12e janvier 1628 et né jumeau. Celui qui vint au monde quelques heures avant moi fut nommé François et mourut 6 mois après. Je fus nommé Charles par mon frère, le receveur général des finances, qui me tint sur les fonds avec Françoise Pépin, ma cousine. Ma mère se donna la peine de m'apprendre à lire, après quoi on m'envoya au collège de Beauvais, à l'âge de 8 ans et demi. J'y ai fait toutes mes études, ainsi que tous mes frères, sans que pas un de nous y ait jamais eu le fouet. Charles Perrault belongs to a bourgeois family. His father is a lawyer, he's the last of 7 children and 5 will reach adult life. And his father, who is a lawyer, will take extremely good care of the education of all his sons. He makes them repeat their lessons after supper every evening after his very busy day as a lawyer. And they also live in the knowledge neighborhood of Paris. Le quartier Panthéon-Sorbonne, so they are in the part of Paris where all the schools, all the universities are located. They don't even need to go to a boarding school. They can go back to their own family home at night when they do their studies, when they follow their education, which he will continue to do for his own children later. And this is what remains of his school. There is just a chapel left. Now, all the Perrault brothers are very good at school. They are very curious, they love learning, they have a real appetite for science, literature, poetry, mathematics, astronomy, theology. And Charles Perrault, his favorite days were the days at school where they had some debates. They were debating about philosophical or theological topics, and he preferred these days than the day at home when he was not working. Now let's join him. In 1644, he's 16 years old, and this day he had decided to stop school completely. He's done with school, he doesn't want to go back there anymore, and in his memoirs he tells us what happens and where he's going. We are in Le Jardin du Luxembourg in Paris. In his memoir he doesn't tell us though what his father thought of this excellent idea of stopping school for good.
Il m'ordonna une seconde fois de me taire, sur quoi je lui dis en me levant que, puisqu'il ne me faisait plus dire ma leçon, car en ce temps-là les philosophes disaient leur leçon, qu'on ne disputerait plus contre moi et qu'il m'était défendu de disputer contre les autres, je n'avais plus que faire de venir en classe. En disant cela, je lui fis la révérence et à tous les écoliers et sortis de la classe. Un de mes amis nommé Borin, qui m'aimait fort, qui s'était en quelque sorte rangé auprès de moi parce que toute la classe s'était déchaînée contre lui sans savoir pourquoi, sortit aussi et me suivit. Nous allâmes de là au Jardin du Luxembourg, où ayant fait réflexion sur la démarche que nous venions de faire, nous résolûmes de ne plus retourner en classe, parce qu'il n'y avait plus à y profiter.
He will actually continue to be homeschooled with his friend and then have his lawyer degree 2 years later.
Forests and woods are as important in Charles Perrault's fairy tales as castles or princesses. But ironically, he was a strict Parisian. He preferred working in his office or among his books than traveling. When he was invited by a friend to go hunting, it was such a traumatic experience for him that he had to write a funny poem about it. And the problem was not to kill animals, it was to wake up at 4 a.m. when you went to bed at midnight, and also to carry a very heavy weapon on his delicate shoulder.
In his late 20s, he published his very first writing. It is a poem called Le Portrait d'Iris. It will have a lot of success, and it is the celebration of the face and the body, mainly the body of a lady. He pretends in his memoirs that it was nobody specifically, it was not written for anyone special or anything like that. We know better than that, Charles. Fortunately, an acquaintance of him mentions that it was the wife of a banker, Madame Bordier, and she was really real. And on the poem, he even wrote an entire stanza on her breast. Charles, really? And this is the stanza. Not have Madame Bordier, it will go nowhere for him, but his friend Philippe Quinault, who already works for Lully, the composer of Louis XIV, will take the poem, pretend it was him who wrote it, and make it work for his own cause towards a lady he loved. With the very busy life he had, he didn't have a lot of time to court ladies. All the Perrault brothers seem to have been really on the reserved side towards women. At 43 years old, he only has one of his older brothers who is married. All the other ones are not married. And he will be pushed to marry by one of his brothers who wanted to have some descendants. What we know is that he was pretty fastidious with ladies. There are glimpses of his approach to ladies in his writing. In Le Petit Pousset, for example, he writes, "The woodcutter was of the same opinion as many other people who like a woman to have the knack of saying the right thing, but not the trick of being always in the right." He eventually married the daughter of one of his friends, the beautiful Marie. She just comes from the convent. She's 19 years old, which is absolutely normal for the 17th century, nothing strange here. And they will have actually a very happy marriage. There are memories of his marriage throughout his work. In Sleeping Beauty, in the moral at the end of the fairy tale, there is direct evocations of his marriage. Sleeping Beauty is probably his masterpiece. He wrote several versions of it, a first one published in the magazine Le Mercure in 1696, which was much longer with many more details, and eventually the final version in 1697. This fairy tale reveals him as a skilled and exquisite storyteller and a very delicate writer. Now you may be wondering what are actually the differences between the version the Grimm brothers published in 1812, which is a shortened adaptation of his fairy tale, and his own much longer version.
Then he went on still farther, and all was so quiet that breath could be heard. And at last he came to the tower and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping there. She lay so beautiful that he could not turn his eyes away, and he stooped down and gave her a kiss. But as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awake and looked at him quite sweetly.
Charles, would you like to give a writing lesson to the Grimm brothers, please? I think they need one.
Il traverse plusieurs chambres, pleines de gentilshommes et de dames, dormant tous, les uns debout, les autres assis. Il entra dans une chambre toute dorée, et il vit sur un lit dont les rideaux étaient ouverts de tous côtés le plus beau spectacle qu'il eût jamais vu. Une princesse qui paraissait avoir 15 ou 16 ans et dont l'éclat resplendissant avait quelque chose de lumineux et de divin. Il s'approcha en tremblant et en admirant et se mit à genoux auprès d'elle. Alors, comme la fin de l'enchantement était venue, la princesse s'éveilla et le regardant avec des yeux plus tendres qu'une première vue ne semblait le permettre. « Est-ce vous, mon prince ?» lui dit-elle. « Vous vous êtes bien fait attendre. »
In Perrault's fairy tale, there is the idea of the environment, the description is very precise, the lights, the sounds, you also know what they are going to listen to afterwards, the music. He loves going into details. He is a member of l'Académie Française and he has written poetry his entire life. Every word matters. In whatever he writes, nothing is there by accident. And here, this is a slow motion scene. The prince goes slowly to reach the princess, just like going to an altar. It doesn't go fast, just like in the Grimm's version where he goes really fast and then kisses her. There is no kiss in the French version at all. There is a reason for that. It is a French story. It is the century of conversation. What is the very first thing the prince and the princess are going to do when they meet? They are going to talk, and they are going to talk for hours. In his first original version he published in the magazine, they were even talking longer. He shortened it a tiny bit, but the first thing she says is « Vous vous êtes bien fait attendre ». It's not like she's jumping on him or he's jumping on her. Charles is also very facetious. In many of his fairy tales, there are hidden jokes that the reader may get or not, but he still puts them. And in his version, the fairy has thought of what would happen during the long time that Sleeping Beauty was asleep. All the academic specialists of Charles Perrault all agree there. The fairy gave to the princess some erotic dreams. She dreamed of the prince for all this time. That's why she's not even surprised to see him. She knows him already. He has been in her dreams for 100 years, and that's why she says that. The first thing she says to him confirms the dreams the fairy has given to her. Unfortunately, his life will not turn as a fairy tale. After 7 years of very happy marriage with his wife, the beautiful Marie, she will die of smallpox very quickly. He will be extremely grieved by this death, and he will decide to never remarry. And it is very unusual for a man in his position during this century, having 4 children who are very young. Any other man would have remarried.
Among all the projects he took part to, he completed in 1675 Le Labyrinthe de Versailles, a Versailles labyrinth, a beautiful labyrinth with 38 fountains, created by 9 sculptors with
330 animals sculpted and painted, all inspired by Aesop fables. He published for that a beautiful souvenir book he wrote for the visitors who would come to the labyrinth and who would like to have a memory of their visit of Versailles. This is the manuscript with some beautiful paintings which would be used later to create the engravings. This is what he writes in the foreword. Entre tous les bocages du petit parc de Versailles, celui qu'on nomme le labyrinthe est surtout recommandable par la nouveauté du dessin et par le nombre et la diversité de ses fontaines. Il est nommé labyrinthe parce qu'il s'y trouve une infinité de petites allées, tellement mêlées les unes dans les autres qu'il est presque impossible de ne s'y pas égarer. Mais aussi, afin que ceux qui s'y perdent puissent se perdre agréablement, il n'y a point de détour qui ne présente plusieurs fontaines en même temps à la vue, en sorte qu'à chaque pas, on est surpris par quelque nouvel objet.
Come in, join me, I'm in this house at les Fossés de l'Estrapade. So he moved there a little while after his beautiful wife passed away, and after he also had been put to the exit door by Colbert, who wanted rather to have his son at his own work as a superintendent des bâtiments. So he was a little disgusted by all what happened over there and decided to retire, and he decided to move in this house not far from where they lived as children with his brothers. So he comes here with his brother Claude and his 3 children. One passed away a few years earlier. So this is a pretty comfortable house. It's not a castle or anything like that, but it's a house à porte cochère. Une maison à porte cochère means he has some carriages, he has a court just under it, so there is the gate and then the carriages can come in. He has some stables on the back in the court where he can keep his 2 carriages. And it is also in this very house that he will write his fairy tales, so it's a very important house. So at the bottom, on the ground floor, you have all the rooms for the storage, the kitchen, the servants' room and the pantry room. And there is also a room for his organ, because in the Perrault family, of course, they love music. In the first floor, there is all his own rooms, his bedroom, his office cabinet, and his antechambre. It's really the way the 17th century organized the space. And there is a wardrobe too, which is not only for Claude, it's a room for a lot of things. There are also the rooms for Claude, his brother, and his rooms are packed with instruments of science. He's an architect, so there are a lot of things to draw, things to study, a lot of books. On the second floor, there are all the rooms for his kiddos, his children. So there are 3 bedrooms. Each child has his bedroom, so it's pretty nice, and 2 study rooms. And on the very, very last floor, there are 2 attics and also the room for the cook. What is certain is that all the beautiful things he saw while he was working for Colbert at Versailles definitely inspired him for his fairy tales, in the decor, the architecture, the gardens, and the beautiful events that took place too over there, and sometimes he was involved in these projects. And all this will be reflected many years later in his fairy tales. And for that you only have to see Bluebeard's apartment, for example. The profusion and magnificence of the tapestry, bed, sofa, cabinets, tables, stands. There were mirrors in which they could view themselves from top to toe, some with frames of plate glass and others with frames of silver and gilt lacquer. They were the most superb and beautiful things that had ever been seen. And Charles Perrault took himself care of the decoration of many apartments, which could really remind us of Bluebeard's castle. There is also the mirror apartments in Sleeping Beauty, which really remind us of La Galerie des Glaces at Versailles, and the name Le Marquis de Carabas in Puss in Boots totally remind us of a nickname which was given to Louis XIV, which was Le Marquis de Filigrane. And he was called Le Marquis de Filigrane because he had the passion for furniture made in golden thread. So it was like a filigrane of gold. And he started to write his fairy tales as a distraction from his most important books, the one he was most proud of, which were a big
volumes book about the modern and the ancient. It was a big argument that took place in France in the 17th century between the ancients and the modern, la querelle des anciens et des modernes. He defended everything that was made in the 17th century in opposition to what was done during the antique era, both in Greece and in the Roman Empire. He was also writing at the time 2-book series about the most important man in France, so this kept him very busy. So he started to write his fairy tales in 1694, 1696, first publishing them in magazines, trying verses version first. The first one in verses he wrote, he put his name under it, but when he started to write in prose, he was not very comfortable and he decided to use the name of his son, Pierre Perrault d'Armancourt. And the reason he did that is because he was always criticized, always attacked for whatever he was doing. And even more during these years because he was a defender of the 17th century over the antique era and he had a lot of enemies. Whatever he wrote and published, he received criticism. That's why in all of his foreword, he's always defending himself, sort of imagining what sort of criticism he's going to receive. And one of his most ferocious enemies was Nicolas Boileau. And it's certainly because of him that he didn't dare putting his name under his fairy tales. Because Nicolas Boileau had been his enemy pretty much his entire life. He had attacked all the Perrault's brothers their entire life. He wrote his memoirs at the very end of his life to defend his brothers. And Nicolas Boileau was a defender of the antiques, of course, so they quarrel about that. He had been treated by his brother Claude, who was a doctor, and he treated him for a bladder issue Nicolas Boileau had, which was treated with 17th century remedies. So, as you can imagine, it was not totally solved, and it was actually worse after. But it was not entirely the fault of his brother, it's just like he used what he could have available at the time. They also had another quarrel about women. Nicolas Boileau wrote a sort of poem against women. He said that there were not 3 women to be found in Paris who were virtuous, who were not cheating on their husband and behaving like a virtueless woman. And Charles Perrault, in his facetious way, replied with a beautiful text, a beautiful poem called L'Apologie des Femmes, to defend women and to defend the marriage and the importance of marriage after having been himself very happy in his own marriage, but also to defend women. And in the foreword, he writes that if this theory was true, that there is not 3 women to be found in Paris who are virtuous, in that case, the consequences of this theory are that we are all bastards. And what could Nicolas Boileau reply to that? So he used the name of his son to protect himself, a bit like a shield. What makes his fairy tales very different from all the fairy tales which were published at the time by all these women fairy tale storytellers is that he wrote his stories for children only. And he told them to his children himself before he eventually put them down on paper. And also heard these stories told by some servants who were telling them to his own children. There is a beautiful illustration that he has made, or maybe his son has painted, which represent his 3 children and a servant in their home. There is a beautiful fire behind the children, a cat which is getting warm by the fire, and this old servant who is telling them stories, and all the 3 children are fascinated. This illustration is actually very, very precious because it is his 3 children. You can see his 2 sons, his younger son, who is dressed like a girl, of course, as it was the habit in the 17th century, his little daughter, who has her hair à la fontange, and her eldest son, who is with his hat and a little elegant on his chair. The very pure and simple style he tried to have in his fairy tales is also completely different from all the ornaments, embellishment, very sophisticated style the women fairy tale writers were using. And they were also creating a sort of romantic stories. They never wrote their stories for children, which is a very, very big difference. It's also during the same years that his grandniece, Mademoiselle L'Héritier, invited him to meet Madame d'Aulnoy. He's going to go in her salon littéraire she has, where she receives writers, storytellers, and people are reading aloud what they have written. He's going to hear her stories, and he's going to dedicate one of his first versified fairy tales, Les Souhaits Ridicules, to Madame d'Aulnoy. So it's the story with the woodcutter who dreamed to have something unbelievable happening to them, and instead of using well the wishes they had been given, they are going to dream of sausages and, you know, their stories.
The very last years of his life, he had been busy writing his own memoirs, mainly focusing on his career and his brothers. He never missed a session at l'Académie Française, which became a second family for him. All his brothers, wife, nephews, and 2 of his children were gone now. Only one of his sons will outlive him. He will die quietly in his house at Les Fossés de l'Estrapade on May 15, 1703, in his 70s. Now what remains, 3 centuries later, of his accomplishments? The beautiful labyrinth he created at Versailles, with 330 animals sculpted, all inspired by Aesop's fables, were entirely destroyed 1 century later by Louis XVI, the king, who preferred instead having a boring English garden. In Paris, his statue and Le Chaboté, Puss in Boots, can be seen in Le Jardin des Tuileries. As Charles Perrault had been a defensor and a protector of this garden, he prevented Colbert from closing it to the Parisians. Colbert wanted to have the garden only for the joy of the king. And it's thanks to Charles Perrault that you can wander in this garden. Though his poetry and his essays have been forgotten now, his prose and his fairy tale, what he called his bagatelle, his mere trifles, 3 centuries later, are more alive than ever, and are still read, told and enjoyed by young children. A little shadow remains, the manuscript of his fairy tale that was so neatly written and beautifully embellished by painted scenes inspired by the stories, had been bought in 1953 by a library and museum in New York and has escaped the French National Collection. No doubt that such an active defensor of the French language and the French culture would be a little horrified to know that. Several precious books have been read and enjoyed to prepare this video. The memoirs of Charles Perrault are available in different editions. The one from the early 19th century had some paragraph missing, and the one from 1909 was loyal to the original manuscripts. It also includes the travel journal of his brother, architect Claude, on his way to Bordeaux in 1669, which is very, very nice to read. Charles Perrault's memoirs are available translated in reprint and in old copies. The beautiful biography by Patricia Bouchenaud-Deschamps, published in 2018, is only available in French. The precious foreword in the memoirs and also a long article by Paul Bonnefond from the early 20th century was found on the digital collection of the French National Library Gallica and was also very helpful.
Of course, all his fairy tales have been constantly republished throughout the centuries and are available translated in many languages. Not all translations have the same value. Many have been abridged, altered or adapted, so be careful when you start to read your Charles Perrault that you have a high quality translation.